Hey, welcome back to another Anatomy of a Pose. I'm Sarah, and we are going to be talking about Adho Mukha Svanasana today. So, downward facing dog. Downward facing dog is a nice way to build off of what we previously talked about in Uttanasana and our standing forward fold, because the action of what's going on in the hips is quite similar. So we're shortening here or flexing the front of the body while we're extending the back of the legs. Now we're going to be introducing some new ideas, and that is because we're putting weight into the hands now. And so there's a whole lot more we're going to unpack from what's going on in the shoulders, because that's probably going to be one of the more important and new concepts that I hope is going to serve your practice well. So let's talk already about what we know. We know about what we talked about in Uttanasana, or standing forward fold, that when there is a shortening in the front of the body, specifically there we're talking about the legs, that there is a shortening in the front of our legs, thinking about drawing the top of the foot to the shin. The major action there is going to be your anterior tibialis. So if you find along your shin bone, you can find that edge right there. Just to the side is this beautiful muscle called your anterior tibialis. That can there's going to be some trigger points along there, but it's because we use it so much because it's going to help us flex our ankle. So drawing the top of our foot up towards our shin. As we do that, we travel up the leg, there's a drawing into flexion here, or an action into your quadricep, into your thigh muscle. And then the group of our hip flexors that help flex our hips. So that when we then lengthen the back side of the body, we're thinking about the length from the backside of our heel, our Achilles tendon back here, up to our gastrocnemius, our major muscle here of our calf muscle, length of our hamstrings, this area here behind the knee, up to the pelvis, and then how that influences what's going on here in our spine and our pelvis on the backside of our sacrum and all the way up our spine. So if we start there and think about that action and how and what's going on, we can build on so that we can put a little bit more attention into the newer ideas of what's going on in the shoulders. So let's just start and play around with what's going on in the lower body. So just keep breaking it down step by step. So if we started here in a tabletop and curl under my toes are about as wide as my hips. That's going to allow me to have a little bit more space in my pelvis when I start to lift up, versus having my feet too close together and noticing how that changes the action of what's happening here in the legs. So if I lift up my knees and reach my hips up and back, you can see already here I've got flexion in my hips, flexion here, the top of my foot drawing towards my shin. And then when I lift up through my hips, it's because I'm lengthening here through the back side of my legs. So as I'm lengthening, it's because I'm activating my quadriceps, so the front of my thigh, to lengthen the back side of my legs. Now, oftentimes you might imagine that the heels do not have to be on the ground. The heels here in this case are energetically drawing down towards the ground from the action of lifting up through our hips. Now, that's because I have this stabilizing action of what's happening here in my center. So let's stay focused on the legs for now. Feel here and imagine that your feet could get longer, that there's a length in the bottom of your feet. The length in your hamstrings, now again, doesn't mean they have to be straight. Absolutely imagine, and if you remember back to Uttanasana, remember when I said when we were in a standing forward fold, if I soften my knees, it's going to allow me to keep a little bit more length and space on the backside of my sacrum. And that then is going to allow me to keep my spine a little bit more into a neutral shape. And that's what we are wanting here. And so if you imagine that Tadasana, so our standing up, our mountain pose, where the front of our spine or the front of my body and the back of my body is working together to stabilize my spine, that same action is happening here, even though there's a hinge at the hips. So if that means in order to get the length through my spine by softening my knees, let's do that. That's going to be priority over having the legs longer.
Okay? So now imagine the energetic quality here, and a new shape that we're going to talk about in the legs is what is called internal rotation. So there's a slight, it's not major, there's a slight inward or wrapping inward of the legs. So one of the great ways to feel this out is actually take a block. So if I take a block and I put it between my thighs, here just above my knee, again, set this up, curl under my toes, my feet are as wide as my hips. Already my hips are flexed, already they're short, already here. Imagine that my spine here is being supported here from my core, all the way as it wraps around. So our transverse abdominis is here to wrap around. We talked about this in Tadasana, where it wraps around to stabilize what's going on here, all the way around my core, all the way through my center. So that when I lift up, I'm already long through here. Hips go back and then up. Now, if I draw some intention here of drawing my legs towards the block, you might even notice if you looked at your heels, that your heels even have a light, or just that's really, really slight, little shift outward. When you do that, you're going to draw a little bit more intention of what's going on in one of your important hip flexors, your tensor fascia latae, which is a hip flexor. It's a really small muscle, but it connects into our IT band. So this very thick corded tendon on the outside of our legs is also going to be getting some length here. So when we then feel little inward action in towards the block, spreading out through my whole foot, and then energetically, again, feeling the length and lift up through my sitting bones, that bottom part of my pelvis. There now is this action where the front of my leg is shortening or drawing into action or flexion, and the back side of my body is extending or lengthening. So come on down. And so there's a lot to unpack there. And so if I had to say, okay, of all of those elements of just what's going on in the legs right now, where's priority number one? If I had to prioritize that, I would say focus more in on the flexion of your hips so that you can lift up your sitting bones. The length then that comes from the legs naturally in order to do that is what's going to be the intention or the action there. So keeping and adjusting what's going on through your hips to serve the length in your spine, I personally think is priority number one in this shape. Now, you're going to have a lot of different variations as far as what people prioritize there and the different cueing that people will share as teachers, because we all come at different backgrounds and why we teach things the way that we do. So keep that in mind. Keep asking questions and stay curious about it, because this is always this dynamic environment of learning. So keep chatting about it. Keep asking really great questions. So now, let's talk about the new stuff. So serratus anterior. This muscle group, because we're talking about stabilizing through our center, this muscle is so unbelievably important for several different reasons. It is an important core stabilizer. It lands, or it lives. So here's your scapula. It lives underneath your scapula, and it attaches from the inside of your scapula and wraps around, beautiful little fingers, and it inserts here into your rib cage. So what that allows us to do is to keep our shoulder blades stabilized on our back. That's really, really, really important in a lot of different shapes in a practice or in any movement practice. It not only is going to help stabilize your shoulder blades on your back, but it also allows your shoulder blade to move up your back, so that when you lift your arms, your shoulder blade and your arm bone glide together. This glide, and I'm going to turn around so you can see me. Watch here the shoulder blade. And I'm even going to put my hand there so you might be able to see it just a little bit better without me getting in the way. Sometimes if we take the other hand around, you can feel it. That can also give another feedback to our brain to say, oh, that's what's going on back there. So if I go to lift up my arm, you can start to see already how the shoulder blade is moving along with the rhythm of my arm bone moving in the socket there, in the shoulder socket. And then watch when I bring my arm down, my shoulder blade then is going to rotate downward and back inward towards my spine. So anytime that we lift the arms overhead, there's that glide, the shoulder blades are naturally going to go upward. So when you think about, naturally if I lift my arms up over my head and my arms are overhead in a downward facing dog, the shoulder blades will naturally go up towards your ears. Now, it is really common to hear it cued in a class to drag your shoulder blades down your back. And today I want to talk about a different action. It might help you feel a little bit more stable in your shoulder so you can feel the spaciousness that comes from this area of the body when we are in downward facing dog. So, one of the elements that I find helps me find action through that area is if you imagine this space of your shoulder blade, the edge of your shoulder blade that's towards your armpit. That area of the spine of your shoulder blade, I want you to imagine that you can draw that towards your chest or towards your breastbone. What that's going to do is allow you to feel the broadness across your back and stabilizing your shoulder blade on your rib cage. Now, when we then think about that upward rotation of the shoulders towards the ears, we're not wanting to crowd it, right? We're not like squishing it up in there. That's not what we want anyway, because energetically that means we just shut it down. And that's never what we're after. So how is it that we can bring life and stabilization through here so that the rest of the action that goes into the arm can do what it is that it's supposed to do? So let's just play with that for a moment and then we'll add on. So if we come now into our hands and our knees, if you want to have the block underneath between your legs, if you're playing with me, you can. But if not, already set it up into tabletop. Now, imagine, so oftentimes what can happen is that there's like a sinking into the wrist. I want you to push the floor away. And even if you think about pushing the floor away through the big knuckles of your hand, so these right here, push them away. Lengthen out the joint of your wrist, lengthen out the joint of your elbow, lengthen out some space here between the shoulder and where that comes into the socket, and take that space and feel how you can wrap your shoulder blade here towards, and if you take your other hand there, you can feel that action and that life there, okay? And then here, again, it's okay. My arm's not up overhead, so my shoulder blade hasn't gone upward yet. But this is just to feel what it's like to draw energy here into the arm. So that when I lift up my knees and I shift my hips back, lengthen through my legs, my spine stays neutral. Now again, just feel out that space around your shoulder blade. Can you wrap that edge of your shoulder blade towards your armpit, towards your chest, and feel how your shoulder blades can feel broad on your back? Then let's talk about where we add from there. Because if we think about the stabilization here proximally, so that means closer to our core, that's always where I want to focus first. And this is probably the therapist part of my brain working and focusing on our stabilizing muscles and then reaching outward. So let's talk about what's going on from the elbow down, because that's a different action. So when we are here, serratus anterior, check. Let's talk about the arm bone here. Our upper arm bone now is an external rotation. So there's a wrapping outward of the upper arm. Now you can see what happens when I do that in the rest of my arm, right? If I externally rotate, which means wrapping it away from your center, then we've got spaciousness and openness across the front of the shoulder. Now, what's going to happen is that this is not what your lower arm does in a downward facing dog or in any weight bearing in a yoga class. Instead, what we do is that we wrap the lower arm down or inward. So there's an inward rotation from the elbow down and an external rotation at the upper arm. So it's like a double spiral, which is a very complicated action of the body. And why that is so important to remember is that for people with wrist issues, it is a very common area of injury here at the wrist on the ulnar side of your hand. So your ulna bone is your forearm bone on the pinky finger side of your hand. If I'm bearing weight and I'm rolling onto the pinky finger side of my hand, I'm loading that joint, and that doesn't make that joint very happy. So what I want you to think about is in this double spiral action, so there's an external rotation, a wrapping open of your arm bone. Now we're going to think about how can we reach down to the thumb side of the hand. So the pad here, this beautiful triangle here between the pointer finger and your thumb finger. And you can notice here, I'm talking about these big knuckles right here. Okay? So just for a moment, without putting any weight into our arms, if I externally rotate my arm, and let's just for external rotation, let's turn our palm up so we can just feel what it's like to have the arm bone go up, feel and notice the shoulder blade. We already talked about that. And you can already feel there's a lot of action there. And you'll notice here, again, there's a gliding upward, and that's okay. Now, and I realize you can't see my whole hand. Now, keeping that external rotation, now I'm just gonna turn my palm. Now my upper arm bone didn't move. Try that again. I'm gonna bring it back down. So first, externally rotate your arm, so your palm's gonna come up. So that when I lift my arm up, because my arm is going up overhead in an upward facing dog, oh, the action there is sneaky. It's a lot, it's more work than maybe it looks like. So there's external rotation wrapped around the arm. Now don't move here. And now just turn your palm. There's that double spiral. And you might already feel still the energy that's going on around your shoulder blade. All right, bring that down. And so let's put that into package and how we put weight into that space. Okay? So setting up from our tabletop, spreading out through your hands here, and already think about the thumb and the pointer side of your hand in that little triangular space there. Think about lengthening the space here in the joint. So if you push down to the big knuckles of your hand, think about how you could lengthen through your elbows, reach your arm long. Already there's a lot of energy going on right here. So that's wonderful. Keep the action of the thumb and the pointer side of your hand. Feel and keep the length in your arms. Curl under your toes. Lift up your knees. And there you feel the transverse abdominis supporting your core, or supporting your center. And then shift your hips back, so we increase the hip flexion, and then lengthen the back of your legs. You're lengthening the back of your arms. You're allowing your shoulder blade to glide in the way that it's going to glide. Keep reaching down to the thumb side of your hand. Let both sides of your neck grow long, and your spine here is long and it is neutral. Breathe here, staying and just noticing the energetic quality here through your hands. Keep wrapping your arm bones away from your center. Shoulder blade here, that edge towards your armpit is drawing towards your chest. And then you might feel your arm getting a little bit longer. So the back side of your triceps here, your triceps are extending. They're lengthening. Staying here, thinking a little bit about the hips, so lifting up through your sitting bones, maybe even softening in your knees here to help support the length of your spine. And then lower your knees back down to the ground. And that, my friends, is downward facing dog. If you have any questions, any other curiosities, anything that you want help modifying around with that shape, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help. Also, a little tidbit, or not tidbit, or something to say, is that if there is any other shapes that you are super curious about and want me to break down during this time that we have, send me a message. I'm more than happy to talk a little bit more and make this about what it is that you're needing. My intention in the next few weeks is to start to work up into standing poses. So we'll be talking about warriors and other shapes similar to that. So reach out. You can find me on Perennial's website. You can also find me on my website, sarahpetersotyoga.com, or on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find. If not, Claire knows how to find me. And Meg. So take care of yourselves, be well, and I will see you all hopefully very soon. Namaste.